Hjärtligt välkommen till Röhsska idag, till vernissage av Forensic Architecture, Design as Investigation, och till en föreläsning som snart ska ta plats. Jag heter Nina Due och jag kommer till att ta en liten introduktion här på engelska och vi fortsätter med det idag. So welcome everyone to the Röhsska Museum of Design and Craft and to the opening of Forensic Architecture, Design as Investigation, which will soon lead into a presentation by the founder of Forensic Architecture, Professor Eyal Weizman. But before I let Eyal on stage, I would like to say a few words about the exhibition. Design and architecture today offers so much more than consumer products and smart buildings. Design is also widely used as a tool through which strategies and methods are applied to better understand the world around us. With the exhibition Forensic Architecture, Design as Investigation, the Röhsska Museum is dedicated to its mission of making the wider disciplines of designs more visible. We are proud to present a selection of projects by the UK-based research agency Forensic Architecture, whose work has received much attention over the past years. This is Forensic Architecture's first solo exhibition in Scandinavia, and perhaps more importantly, the first exhibition framing a significant body of work through the lens of design. Forensic Architecture's strength is grounded in their multidisciplinary practice to making political and material truths visible. Their practice includes architects, software developers and filmmakers, investigative journalists, scientists and lawyers who play a vital role in recreating crime scenes with forensic detail, carefully considering both materiality and the humanitarian impact in order to bring forward truth and justice. In our view, the museum are civic spaces and should strive to be open and inclusive. They stitch together ideas and materiality with the intention to empower dialogues between the museum and its many publics. This is where the different perspectives and beliefs can meet in a safe space. With Forensic Architecture's human-centered and challenging investigations, Röhsska acts as a public forum to reflect the cultural context of their work. The Röhsska Museum would like to give special thanks to Forensic Architecture, especially to Eyal, Sarah Nankival and Nicholas Masterson for their time and support in bringing this exhibition to life. We would also like to thank the design studio Varv Varv for their graphic design work, both for the exhibition and the catalogue that you have as you enter the exhibition. The museum is also very grateful for the invaluable support from our collaborators Kvadrat, Ogeborg, Artec, Arctic Paper, Göteborgstryckeriet och Majorna Grafiska. And lastly, I would like to say thanks to my colleagues at the museum for realizing the exhibition and our public program. And I mention them by name. Annette Zetterby Angefred, Lena Haftell, Elisabeth Lindstrand, Andrea Erlandsson, Anna Flogård, Eva Rosengren, Clara Kjell, Magdalena Ågren, Charlotta Persson, Carl Bengtsson, Karlander. And a special thanks to Stefan Turner or Johan Durell, who have designed and curated the exhibition. So as you can see, it takes a lot of effort and many people to make these things happen. Now, before I hand over to Eyal, a little bit of practical information, I'm afraid. Escape routes. We have one here to my left, and one where you all came in. And the toilets are right behind you should you need to. I also appreciate that some of you might want to stay for the whole presentation, others might decide to do other things, and that's perfectly fine. Just with a little bit of respect for the speakers, so we keep it as quiet as possible is much appreciated. But with that, and no further ado, Eyal Weizman. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming on a weekend. Thank you, Nina, for this really generous introduction, and mainly to everybody here at the Röhsska Museum, and to Johan and Nina for making this exhibition possible As a research agency, rather than exhibiting artists, let's say, we take exhibitions as a form of partnership in evidence production. And I think that one of the pieces that you're going to see today in the exhibition has actually been produced in collaboration with the curatorial team here and is going to be presented in forums that we hope are going to increase accountability for workers' rights in Southeast Asia, particularly those that are making those clothes that we are wearing. And you would see in the exhibition the architectural dimension of it. But I wanted to start somewhere else, and I wanted to start today really with something like the history, the long history of forensic architecture, because somehow the first project that perhaps led to what forensic architecture is today, and I'll touch upon and I'll tell you all about it as we go along in the lecture. It started here in the West Bank, and this is the image in front of you, where as a very young architectural graduate, I have decided back in around the year 2000, I studied in London at the Architectural Association, came back to Israel, Palestine to experience the collapse of the Oslo process into what was at the time called the Second Intifada, and decided that sometimes architecture and design could better be used as analytical technique rather than as ways of producing new spaces. And that led to a collaboration with a human rights group called B'Tselem, who is the human rights, very well-known human rights group dealing with the violation of Palestinian national and human rights caused by Israeli colonial practices in the West Bank. And the kind of proposal that started our collaboration was, could it be that those people that we think are the violators of human rights, that is to say, soldiers, policemen, politicians perhaps, is not enough of a circle. That what we need to make sure that we understand is that architects and urban designers could themselves be violators of human rights. And that led to the first human rights report that tried to incriminate those architects building in the settlements or the colonies in the West Bank on Palestinian land. And these were crimes, so we wanted to show, that were committed on the drawing board, right? So the architects at the time were still using drawing boards, and in the way that they draw the line, violence and violations of international law and human rights are committed. And part of that effort was an attempt to draw these realities as a precise map. No maps of the West Bank existed. It took me about a year flying over, driving through, measuring, photographing to produce a map. This is just a section of it that show the Israeli colonies here in spectrum of blue in relation to Palestinian areas in the West Bank here in spectrum of brown and beige. And what you could see is the way in which the Israeli colonies expand and grow to tear apart Palestinian land. And that the analysis here needed to be tuned to shape and form, to ask ourselves, why is the shape that we see the shape that we see? Why is this particular form spread so long and thin? Why are all those details in it? And a lot of the reading was the work like an archaeologist, starting from material reality and reconstructing from it the political, economical, security, military relations that actually shape that space the way it is. And I think that diagram between politics and form, between design and human rights, is what later led to forensic architecture. But this is very important to start with because, as I will show you soon, it has become a big political issue recently. So here are the settlements in a photograph, and here is the entire West Bank around Jerusalem. Maybe I could have the microphone so I can move around a little bit. And you could see here is the Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and the entire settlement project, as we could see on this map. And different kind of settlements, sometimes built very, very close, putting a barrier to Palestinian built fabric in the West Bank. Why is that important? Because I don't know if you tuned to the news recently, but this week was a very difficult week for people thinking and working for decolonization in Palestine and for Palestinian human rights. This week, Trump has released so-called vision for peace. Even calling it like that is something that is hard to grasp, but in fact is built around the settlement. That is to say, it is the negative shape of Israeli violations of Palestinian rights. So what is being under this plan given to Palestinians is the perforated part of the West Bank where all the settlements are left in place. And this is something, so we return this week, we have to return back to the original work from which forensic architecture emerged in order to show and to confront that kind of peace plan. Now, let us kind of like make a general proposition here about contemporary state violence. Contemporary state violence, and it will become clear in all the investigation I will show you today, is always two things. It's physical violation in real space, and it is a violation of the truth that that violation has at all taken place. It's the crime and the cover-up. And this is how violation of human rights in battlefield work, this is how it works in the West Bank, when Israel denies that the settlement project is at all a problem to Palestinians. And so there's always two kind of debates. There's debates about what is happening, and there is a debate about the means of evidence production. And contemporary state violence always try to confront those independent organizations that insist that we have the means to tell the truth against state pronunciation, against official pronunciation. Recently, that phenomena that every human rights activist knows all too well has gotten a name, post-truth, right? It's nothing new. It's nothing that started with Trump or with Brexit or with Orban in Hungary or in those places. It is a reality for human rights activists all the time. States try to destroy the means of truth production. And we always need to find innovative new ways to establish claims against state denial. Now let's go. We've seen now a huge territory. I'll show you now how it works in a much smaller scale. This bomb cloud in Khan Shaykhun in Syria, 2017, in the spring of 2017, is probably one of the most discussed bomb cloud in the Syrian civil war. And the question about it was, is it a chemical strike? Is this the result of a sarin bomb that has landed in that town, Syrian town, by Syrian forces. Syrian forces in violation of one of the main principles of international law, the ban on chemical weapon. The minute something like that happened, the Twitter is on fire. Pro-Syrian, pro-Russian Twitter activists are, claiming there is no, finding all sorts of gaps and holes within this process. And we've done, together with Human Rights Watch,
created a model of the attack site as possible.
I'm going to try to reduce that. Yeah. So what we've done, as you've seen that, is just a minor contribution to that debate. We've taken the photographs of the site, and we've created a model of it, of the crater of that bomb, and then it went to blast engineers that actually determined that the amount of explosive in this bomb is compatible with a particular class of sarin bomb provided to the Syrian military by the Russian military. That was actually the basis later of Human Rights Watch determination that that chemical strike has taken place. A year later, in another place, another such attack has taken place, another such accusations have happened. And here what you see is a press conference put together by the Syrian Foreign Office, broadcast on Russian TV, in which the generals and politicians, or Russian general and politicians, are looking again at the same crater and bringing some kind of scientific reasons for, and looking exactly at the same crater and also at our analysis of that crater, and seeing how science is mobilized on both ends, right? They're saying, look, the blast radius is in fact, the crater is too small for that bomb called the M4000 that have landed there. And forensic architecture analysis is wrong, and therefore there hasn't been a sarin strike. People died, either they've been executed by the rebels, or the bodies were dragged into the site. So a kind of debate, forensic debate about the truth. In the process, and this was noticed by very close collaborators of us, Bellingcat, they've actually given, for the first time, a model of that bomb. Nobody had a model of that bomb. Nobody had the dimensions. The M4000 with measurement and perfectly executed as a way to refute the crater argument that we had before. Okay, that's a gift, right? If people don't know what they're doing when they deny. Because, architect, you get a drawing, immediately you build a model. You build a model, and then you start working like an archaeologist. And you go like, okay, let's see the pieces that were found. We cannot touch those pieces. We don't have them in hand. But we find them online in all sorts of places with Bellingcat together. And in our software, what we could do is to decramp them. If they're all cramped up together, we open them up. We have some improvised measurements on them. They're not correctly taken, but we can still understand the dimension, we can scale that, and we can construct that bomb like an archaeologist construct an amphora or a clay pot. That is to say, only because we have the drawing of that, we could find the pieces on site and see that they perfectly fit that shape. So sometimes you need to look for a mistake by deniers. And deniers could be an actual epistemological contribution. That is, they can give you knowledge about what is about to happen. So now we are in that debate. And that debate of chemical strike in Syria is one of the most fierce debate that is happening internationally about war conduct. And it creates a lot of passion, and those people that obviously support the Syrian government of Assad would do anything to poke holes in our argument, and anything that we say need to be extremely carefully worded and analyzed. But one thing that is important about chemical munition is that they destroy the kind of typical perception of how things kill in war, right? I mean, you could say, what's the difference? I mean, if the Assad government, if the Israeli government in Gaza, if the US drones, you would see them in the exhibition. We mainly concentrated this exhibition, by the way, on crimes undertaken by Western governments or corporation. But what is the difference between simple artillery and a gas bomb, a chemical bomb? There's something about the airborne nature of chemical strikes, the fact it creates a kind of a lethal cloud that can drift in the wind, and wherever it would reach, that formless form, if you like, would create havoc, death, and injury at its wake. It cannot make distinction. So it is not to say other weapons are okay, but there's something about chemical strikes that kind of captures the imagination, I think, and the fear, the deep fear of those lawmakers that effectively, after the First World War, decided to ban chemical warfare that was employed very much at the trenches of the First World War. And I think that today, thinking about chemical strikes is important because to a certain extent, and when we'll scale up this discussion, we could ask, what is the air that we are all breathing? And who is benefiting from producing that air that we are all breathing? And how a chemical strike is simply an intense and kind of local intoxication, if you like, making toxic of the air that becomes now a universal question, the question for humanity, perhaps. So working on that question of the atmosphere is something that I would like to take you through a number of projects that deal with that and the problems that come with that. So again, making the air toxic, coming in a very somehow lends itself to debate about negation, about no, it's not like that, more than physical kinetic violence, let's say, where you can say, here's a building, now it's gone, a bomb has fallen here. Perhaps there's less of a debate, although there's always are debates, as I will show also. But the question of air seems to be inviting a bit more foggy conversation, to make a kind of a pun over that discussion. April 2018, perhaps the most debated strike, simply because at the wake of the Duma strike, a suburb of Damascus is attacked by the Syrian government. The US government decided unwisely and unjustly, in my opinion, to retaliate, to attack Syria based on this particular evidence, based on forensic evidence. But we wanted to figure out whether indeed there was a strike, a chemical strike in Syria or not, based simply on photographs that were uploaded online. What you see here is a chlorine canister. It's a simple Chlorine canister could be used to cleanse water, or chlorine could be used to cleanse water, swimming pools, etc. You see a Russian journalist who, in fact, is narrating and saying that is a staged event. That has not happened. That canister has been carried from the ground and been placed on this balcony, and that hole has been created by something else, and the 40-odd victims, families that died underneath, died from something completely different. So again, I'll show you the way in which the kind of forensic process goes. We reduce our analysis to whether the canister came from the air or the ground. If it came from the air, it could only be Syria that had thrown it, or Syria and Russia, because they control the air. If it came from the ground, it could only be the rebels, because they control the ground. So what can tell us in here whether that canister came from the air or the ground? Again, there is a chipping here. So we don't know, but it supports, we're talking in forensics, we always talk about balances of probabilities. So where the probabilities start tipping. So we use our kind of architectural skills to build from the videos, to build a model and to see, in fact, that there is a trajectory in which those two bits of destruction could be aligned. And look very carefully at the other things that we see on site. We see a sort of a crumbed fence. Again, we can kind of decrumb it, sort of like stretch it again and see if it fits anything that was above. We don't know that it was there, but at least it fits on size. So that supports, again, a kind of a gravity fall. Another thing that RT, Russia Today, when they release that and they claim to show evidence that it could not be a chemical strike, there is something here that we see in the background of that image. Perhaps that film crew cannot identify it, but when you look very carefully at what it could be, you can actually extend it and see that it fits the dimensions of a canister, and it could be a harness that is being put on those canisters in order for them to drop straight. And we see in other places online that found chemical strike have those canisters, and we can check and see that it fits. So now the probability increases on that. Again, we don't know. The harness is there, but we do not know that this is enough. What we do, we take a 3D model of the canister and we start projecting photographs we find on site from it, and that can describe the object in an almost tactile way. You can almost now touch it. It is, it is something that as close as we can get without being on site, and of course we cannot get on site because the Syrian government now control that evidence, but we can create it and we can start looking at the charring of it, and we can start reading almost the braille of its surface for clues about what has happened. And here, a very interesting thing that we notice is a grid, a faint grid, somehow it could be seen under a layer of dust in it that we think could be the imprint of the canister on the fence, but then you need to measure the fence and the canister and see that, in fact, this works. Interestingly, and again, I just want to show you what it takes to confront those debates about truth, which are debates effectively about violence and about the possibility for government to keep on enacting them. What we see here is drainage sign. Do you see those? They're quite faint, but definitely what happens when a canister discharges in high pressure, gas in high pressure, is that there's condensation on it, And then when it finished discharging that gas, that condensation melts, and these lines of melting, and here are just example of the kind of condensation on gas, but what you see is that it drains upwards, and that's like really a point of concern. How can water drain upwards? Obviously, that signals to us that the evidence has been tampered with. So, something here is not right. Something here is not right. On the one hand, everything that we see in the evidence suggests gravity fall. On the other hand, we see that evidence has been tampered with, and very possibly by the people on the ground. And I think that whereas we still think, in fact, we still know that that was a chemical strike, and later the International Commission for Banned Chemical Weapons have confirmed that this was a chemical strike, after we've done our analysis with Bellingcat and the New York Times on it. We also know to watch out because evidence is being tampered with. But the debate went on. There was a leak on May 13th, 2019, so a year and a month after that strike. A person from the International Commission for Chemical Weapons actually claimed that about another strike, and that his report has not been included in the final determination that was a chemical strike, that the canister that was found in another site is simply too big to have gone through a hole in the ceiling. The leak of that has been used by Russia, by Syria, and by the supporters in the UK and elsewhere to claim that the entire analysis of chemical strike is a hoax, is a false flag one. And we've checked it, and though the proportion of the hole and the proportion of the canister towards itself, in relation to itself, are correct, the relationship between them is not. And that drawing, the manipulation of dimension between 148 and 140 is the entire story of what would have allowed that canister to go through the hole. So I just want to show you how sometimes a difference in a few centimeters in rotating a canister is kind of ratcheted up to a kind of a discussion that happened on a geopolitical level. How an analysis on settlements and how, in fact, where the last settlement house in the West Bank is, will become the line that was later the Trump administration would draw around it. Attention to those things have political significance, and very important so, and we need to understand those things in that way. Here is another. Let's go a bit less lethal, but still about a debate about the air that we breathe. Tear gas. We were invited, just like here, by the Whitney Museum to participate in their quote-unquote flagship exhibition called the Whitney Biennale last year. And they were asking to show our police violence work. I'll show you later a police violence case that we've done. And we were preparing to show it when Hyperallergic, a blog, a news blog about art and politics, has exposed the fact that the deputy chair of the Whitney board is a manufacturer of the tear gas that was used against migrants in the Tijuana-San Diego border, the so-called caravan that came during the election. And all of a sudden, our diagram of action had to change. So usually, just like here, We use exhibitions, we use the production capacity, we use some of the budget of an exhibition to support our work and to produce new evidence and to bring that evidence to the public in a way that does not only make evidence reside in court, right? We say we are showing a lot and we are presenting a lot of work in court, but we say court is not enough. We need to engage the public, we need to show evidence to be political, need to be made public. And we use art and cultural institutions to do that. And, but here, so we use art and culture institution to expose human rights violation. Here, all of a sudden, the tangle was much different, no? Effectively, human rights violation were associated with the museum itself, right? So it's not like you use the art space to expose human rights violation by other people. They were done by the deputy chair of the board, one of the greatest contributors, Warren B. Candace, etc., the manufacturer of a non-lethal manufacture called Safariland. Even the name Safariland to describe less lethal munition is kind of just showing you the kind of the colonial imaginary at the basis of this business. And we said, hold on, we need to do maybe something different. And I also remembered that I'm kind of like the name Safariland and Defense Technology, this subsidiary of it, became I kind of remembered it because, and I went back to my phone and to my photographs of just any routine demonstration that I was present in 2014 in the West Bank. This beautiful landscape, here coming with the protesters, internationals and Palestinians. We want to go to the road, to go to a well and a spring that is outside, beyond the wall, that has been taken from the Palestinians. And here are the Israeli soldiers. And, you know, it's a very routine, it's not even a very violent kind of afternoon. But we are obviously trying to get beyond the and closer to the police, to the soldiers. And what you see here, just spoiling a little bit that pristine landscape, is a tear gas cloud. Also, again, not too much, even. And you know what activists try to do is to break through the tear gas line and get closer to the soldiers so we can engage and then maybe get to the fence. And here we're running in, and the commander is kind of spotting me, and I'm photographing as I'm running and telling this guy here to shoot. And a woman that was running next to me received that canister in the head, and that was manufactured also by the same technology. So I had also a kind of a personal account, let's say, with it. So we wanted to investigate tear gas, and looking really at the at that manufacturer, and place that video at the museum itself. So showing really the kind of the effect of tear gas. And again, think about the air, this airborne substance that is perhaps the most anti-democratic substance you can put into the air. Because what it does is it works against bodies in space, right? Bodies want to congregate in space to protest, and that tear gas is a kind of centripetal force, pushes us out of the center in there. So what we wanted to do was to figure out a way of how to map out where that tear gas is sold. And we took a particular munition called Triple Chaser, because it divides in 3. And we wanted to train a machine learning algorithm to identify it, because one of the problems of open source research is that you need to go through like literally hundreds of thousands of videos to find particular classes of weapons. And what we're doing here is we're training the computer how to see. So you say, that's a triple chaser, that's a triple chaser, that is. So in each angle. And finally, like a child, you show it several times and it learns. But the problem is that we didn't have enough images. We asked activists on the ground to find for us those, and this is, I remember it was working in our team in Tijuana, found one, and this is a friend of mine, Emily Jassir, a Palestinian artist, who's effectively scanning, she's filming, but that allows us to scan it. That's her art residency, probably the most tear-gassed art residency in the world. And so we have a 3D model from which we get a dimension, and we produce a model, and effectively, this is called synthetic classify. We use a capacity to 3D model objects in order to render them realistically, in order to tell the computer how to find them, because we didn't have enough images to teach, so we just throw it in all sort of direction, and we, give it all sort of different charring, etc. And then we put it against pattern backdrop. That is what our computer scientists has recommended, because that allows the classifier, which is the algorithm there to find the tear gas, to understand the figure-ground relation better. And then in kind of more realistic. And here, and sorry, I will stop it and just say that if anyone here has photosensitivity, this is going to be a fast sequence. It has passed the photosensitivity test. But maybe I recommend not looking at the screen for, the next minute or so, if somebody is that. So part of, effectively, this video is a video, if you like, for people and for the machine, right? Because this is the training set that is teaching our algorithm how to identify the triple chaser in different contexts. The pattern background are random background that kind of like make it isolated against the environment. And yeah. So it's imagine an artwork that is for people to see. It's placed in a museum, but it's actually a video for an algorithm to learn. And so here is, and then we send it, so to say, in the wild to find here, to scan images. You put all sort of code words and then send it out with those code words to scrape a particular part of the internet, and then it would render back results with a probability, here 24%, you see it's still in work, that this is a triple chaser. Okay. Again, thinking about the weaponization of the air. Our friends in Gaza, and this is a work that was coordinated by Shuri Demolavi, our researcher in Gaza, noticed that very often the plants next to the border with Israel are showing all sort of dying or showing all sort of types of illnesses on them. And what we realized is that in order to expose the border area, that is to kill all vegetation along it, Israel is spreading herbicides. These are plant-killing material, and effectively fly over Israel, but weaponize the wind in order to take those toxins to the other side. So supposedly within their rights in international law to fly over their territory, but a certain weaponization of the elements in order to do that. And again, the reason that they expose the area next to the border is that the snipers could see anyone that is approaching the border, and you've seen the Great March of Return images where people are being targeted along it. And so you could see effectively another way of weaponizing the air and destroying these fields. Again, I'm not going to speak about it immediately right now, or in details right now, but in forensic architecture, we work both in Papua and in Kalimantan in Indonesia on forest fires, on the kind of perhaps one of the largest toxic smoke cloud that emerged out of the burning of the peat and the forests in Indonesia that is continental in scale. I mean, here is Singapore, etc. So you see the same principle or similar principle with looking at the evidence on the ground for forest fire and then at the kind of informal violence, the sort of what Rob Nixon called the slow violence that is environmental in scale and the consequences of it. I'm going to move forward to show you another quick project that is organized around another logic, perhaps, and that's about migration in a Mediterranean. Europe is currently, the EU is currently trying to stem migration along the Aegean and the Mediterranean coasts, effectively by weaponizing another natural element, and that is the sea itself. The Mediterranean in the winter and spring is extremely dangerous to cross, and so is the Aegean, or to a lesser degree at some point. And the thought effectively articulated by different European agencies and in meeting is to scale down rescue. If there will be no rescue in the Mediterranean, people will not make the journey. Effectively, letting them die just away from our shores so that people will not cross. And the way of doing that, mainly one of the biggest moves is to criminalize those people most competent to rescue. And these are NGOs, really, people like you, young people. We're working with a German NGO called Jugendrettet, or Youth Rescue. Incredibly competent and brave group that just travels the Mediterranean and rescues people in distress. But they are being targeted so that, in fact, the Libyan Coast Guard, who is completely incompetent in rescue, and this is an enormous tragedy that they've caused, of scores of people drowning simply because they are incompetent in rescue. But Europe wants Libyan Coast Guard to undertake the rescue, so people would be returned back to Africa, where they're incarcerated again in what Amnesty called concentration camps. So just to show one element of a work that we've done with them, and this is an affiliated group to forensic architecture that we collaborated with, it's called Forensic Oceanography, is to confront the Italian prosecution evidence that those rescuers are people smugglers. So this is the evidence that the Italian prosecutor is showing. A group of the German rescuers, you see them here towing a boat that has been participating in a successful rescue. The people from that boat have been successfully rescued from the Mediterranean. And they claim, the Italian prosecution claims, that they draw that boat back to Libyan water to aid people smugglers, right? But what in this image, and because of that, they've seized the boat, the mothership of that, the Juventa, they've confiscated it, leading to increased mortality in the Mediterranean. What in this image actually shows us in which direction it is going. Only the shadows of waves in that image. And if you track them, motion track them, you could actually build a very detailed model of that element, of this water body, and study the way the waves go. So you see they're not going in a very, very clear way. You need to really be tuned and reconstruct that. And when you locate it in relation to wind and water flow data, what you see effectively is that the boat is being actually towed northwards. So this is the weather data towards Europe, not towards Libya. So the complete opposite of what the Italian prosecutor was saying. So I know I promised you a police violence case in Chicago, but I think I don't have time, and I want to show you a work that is actually in the exhibition. And that is the 2006, in 2006, a German terror group called the NSU, neo-Nazis, were engaged in a killing spree across Germany of people that either were or they thought were migrants. And a young German man called Halit Yozgat was sitting here while two killers, the two NSU killers, came into the shop, stood around about here, and shot him twice in the head with a silencer and left the room. So far, just like any of the 10 other killings, similar to the 10 other killings they were involved with in Germany in the first decade of the 21st century. Only that in this case, sitting over here at the top, at the time of the killing, or close to the time of the killing, was a German Secret Service agent called Andreas Temme. Andreas Temme was a member of the Verfassungsschutz, or the Constitutional Protection Force, which is, I don't know what's the equivalent here, but in Britain it would be MI5, in the US it would be FBI. And their task is to police, amongst other things, neo-Nazi violence. What would a state spy, state secret service agent, do in a state crime? Not only was he there, he did not report himself to the police that he was there. So after the killing, he is left, immediately after the killing, he has left the room and did not report himself to the police, which found him later, interview him, and he said, well, I didn't hear any gunshots, I didn't smell any gunpowder, and I didn't see a body in space. So 3, like this kind of, not see, not hear, not smell. And the police said, are you sure you didn't see, you didn't hear, you didn't smell? I said, yeah. So, okay then. So you're good to go. And he hasn't been charged. And that idea has terrorized the communities that were anyway being terrorized by the extreme right, that the police itself would seem to do, kind of to cover up for the Secret Service involvement. And nobody knows exactly what's happened there. But lies, state lies, are acts of terror. And the court case in Munich, in which one of those two that killed themselves later, but there was a surviving member of that cell, a woman called Beate Zschäpe, whose trial was held in Munich. And that trial did not at all deal with why the Secret Service agent was there. Another act of terror. The court case itself. We think about, we're going to take our evidence to court. Sometimes the court is an instrument of oppression and terror. When questions were raised on why he was there, the state of Hessen, where the killing took place in the city of Kassel, slapped a 120 years ban on the evidence. this we would only know in 2134 why he was doing there. Nuclear secrets, the cover-up of and anything else is, within 30, 50 years, 120 years evidence. So immediately the material was leaked, or some of the investigation was leaked, but you also need to interpret a leak. And we have built a model of that crime scene, working, in fact, not with the court, but with what was called then the Citizen Tribunal, a group of family members and activists and Turkish community groups to present an evidence not only for what has happened, but for the greater kind of crisis that is called the NSU complex, i.e. the involvement of the state in the killing. So sometimes, as I started, small technical, scientific details have great cultural potential. What is happening within the 77 square meter of that shop, of that internet cafe, have an implication for Germany as a whole. So we decided to really do that one with all the efforts that we can. And again, a curatorial relation helped us do it. And the HKW, the Haus der Kulturen der Welt in Berlin, funded a full model, a one-to-one model, and you can see parts of it in the exhibition later, in which some elements were abstracted because we needed to do sound analysis. So we built the party wall, and we placed all sort of materials to simulate the texture of the room and turned that into a film studio. And we knew that because the killing took place in an internet cafe, what we have very uniquely is the times when every witness that was there in the space logged in and logged out of a telephone. There was still kind of like those telephone services and the internet in there. So we could create a framework, a time-space framework within which, with actors, we would reenact all 16 versions of that event to see what was most likely. And with a question, again, a kind of a phenomenological question, if you like. What is the sensory, what's the limit of the sensory perceptions in this place? These are some of the kind of the plan of our reenactment. You could see it below. And one of the most important bits of evidence that was leaked was a video in which Andreas Temme, the Verfassungsschutzagent himself, reenacts his departing the shop in order to show how he could have left the shop without seeing, hearing, or smelling the shots that happen in there. So, usually we look at images as images of a bombing or of a tear gassing or something like that. We have images of crime. Here, the reenactment is the alleged crime because the crime is him lying, right? So this is not a representation, or well, it is a representation, kind of a fake representation that he does of his movement through the shop, but the crime is in the representation itself, right? So, and that is something that is very important. Of course, he's always looking upwards as if we cannot see. It shows how he could have not seen the body and how he put the coin, enter into the car. We've done that with an actor. We've also reenacted the reenactment itself by filming that act of reenactment, right? And locating the camera in space. So, and here is some of our finds. We wanted to understand whether he could have, now it needs sound actually. Opa. whether he could have missed the sound of the gunfire. So the only place we could fire a gun was Arizona, where you can fire anything at anyone, I guess. So we measured the volume of the sound that the gun makes, and then put a suppressor on it.
The Colt 32 with a wet suppressor.
And then played it in space.
Measurement 1, high-level gunshot. Start now.
And showed effectively that the levels would be completely consistent with him hearing it. Smell simulation, fluid dynamics of the spread of the threshold of smellability, if you like. This is the lowest concentration that, according to World Health Organization, would be sensed. And we showed how long it would remain in the space, and definitely within the time that Andreas Temmer would have experienced it. And perhaps most interestingly, we motion tracked his eyes here and tried to see here, to simulate what he sees when he's there in the video. And as he puts the coin, we could see clearly that the body is within his field of vision. So that should have been it. Of course, it isn't. We showed it in Documenta and received quite a lot of attention of it. So it was prepared for the Citizen Tribunal Unraveling the NSU Complex. They commissioned us. Documenta showed it in a very modest space. We had delegations of policemen, as you could see, and parliamentarians coming to see it. So somehow showing the power of art spaces to become alternative truth forums, if you like. And our claim is, if lies find themselves so deeply ingrained in contemporary political life, it's a paradox, but that the craft of truth finds its place in a gallery. Usually it's the opposite, no? You have art as a temple of beauty, if you like, and the court as that of truth. And here you have an opposite relation. And the parliamentarians asked to bring it into the Untersuchungskommission, a parliamentary commission in Hessen, in which the Secret Service agent himself had to watch our video, right? So that was a kind of a strange move, something being presented in a documenta, in an art exhibition. From there goes into a parliamentary inquiry. The main witness is confronted with the evidence, and the CDU, who was actually in support because they were in government in Hessen at the time, they still are, attacking us, just like Assad, Israelis, Trump government, Syrians, if you like, or Syrian government, not obviously all Syrians, that we work very closely with. They are kind of fake newsing us, no? This is fake. This is art. The fact it was presented in Documenta is a proof that it cannot be serious. And what we are trying to claim again and again and again is that we need to regain the means of production, the means of art production, design, and those instruments in order to claim for civil society truth, in order to claim for social movement the possibility to speak truth through our spaces. This is our art and cultural spaces that we need to repurpose them. I think that the CDU here, who are kind of fake newsing us, have a much older-fashioned relation of art as a kind of idea of fictionalization. Of course, it exists within that, but it's also a romantic idea. And I think that today, the craft of establishing truth need to exist between activists and scientists, architects and designers, between art spaces and universities, creating a process that we call open verification, where you create very unlikely alliances and diagrams of action that actually could establish the kind of common ground, which is the truth about the world in which we live, about the violence and violations that happened in it, and also, as I mentioned, the air in which we breathe. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Eyal. There's a huge crowd here today, and whilst I think people are eager also to go and see the show, it feels a bit of a shame not to give space for a couple of questions. So, is there anyone out there who wants to ask Eyal a question? There, over there.
Hi, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. Just wondering about the concept of engaged objectivity that I have seen used by you somewhere. So I was wondering if that's a concept that you insist upon using, and if you could just expand, elaborate on what that refers to. Thanks.
I mean, this is really at the core of our practice. So, the kind of where should we start? Sort of the modernist conception of science has come up with the term objectivity as in order to bypass one of the greatest risks that scientists saw and that was their own bias, right? So objectivity is a kind of, according to the really great book by Dalston and Gallison, Peter Gallison and Lauren Dustin, called Objectivity, is the sort of the epistemological virtue of modernism. That is to say, the scientist must empty herself or himself, obviously speaking about the 19th century, himself, from any intention, from any wish, from any kind of situated perspective, in order to become a neutral conduit for the absolute measurements that should be observed in the lab. I think our understanding both of science and of activism has changed radically since. We understand that science, even on its own term, without even touching activism, is a form of intervention in the world, is a form of positionality within that needs to involve the scientist, the character of the scientist, and perhaps their institutions and where they exist within the kind of factored within the sort of the understanding of the world. You don't need to only understand and describe the world, you need to describe the world as seen from your perspective, right? So there's two fields for scientific analysis. The way the lab operates, who is in the lab, and what do we need to do, and why we do this experiment, right? So it's kind of introspection, and as it is an analysis of the world. So science is moving into understanding itself as a kind of a form of construction in which facts are made, and I think a lot of you have read Latour on that, and very interestingly so. Activism itself must, or even kind of this quest for truth coming from a perspective, a situated perspective within a conflict or within a debate or within an issue, say whether it is climate change or whether it is human rights, needs to know how to actually mobilize interest into facts. And that is not to say that there is manipulation in there, but there is a kind of a process that we call engaged objectivity. That is to say, nobody that is uninterested, that's simply uninterested, would have gone so much length to look at the Duma airstrike or at what happened in the 77 square meters of this shop, internet cafe in Germany, without having a kind of a political understanding of where it's going. That said, it is extremely important that we undertake a precise analysis and that we are able to show every step of the way how we have arrived there. So whereas in the conception of the neutral scientist, you would say, as a professor in the University of London, I determined that. Effectively, you rely on the facade of authority to buttress your fact. When you work in engaged objectivity, you need to show every step of the way. This is why all our work, and also the work that you see there, look like methodological report. We've done that, then we do this, then we say that, and we know it because of that. Every step that we take, we have to show. Because if you are engaged, and if people are going to attack you on bias, you need to be able to reconstruct, to present to the world a kind of an experiment that could be reproduced even by the people that have different interests than yours. When I go and present in an Israeli court, it never happened that people say, oh, but you're an activist for Palestinian rights, so how should we believe you? And then I'm looking at the expert from the military and I say, and you're an activist for human rights violations. How should we believe what you say? Effectively, each and every one of us has a position. We need to show the facts. We need to let the facts actually, I wouldn't say talk to themselves, by themselves, but effectively the argument would need to be on the facts itself rather than on the position, authority, or political opinion of any one of the experts within that. We cannot afford, but there is no, and in fact, we cannot afford neutral science.
Short question with a short answer.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Anyone? I think you were first.
Hi. I was just wondering, at the very beginning, the map you showed, you explained the blue and brown and beige area. I didn't fully understand what the rest was, the bits that weren't covered, the white. Yeah.
Okay. So at the beginning, I showed a map of the settlements. The very dark blue, I kind of unplugged my computer, so I cannot show it again, but very dark blue is areas under the built fabric of the settlements. The lighter blue are areas where plans for their expansion exist. The very dark brown are Palestinian built fabric, and the two kind of beige colors are area A and B, areas under their control. The white, which is kind of gray on the map, is what's called area C. It's area under Israeli military control in the West Bank. So it's not area that would expand to the settlement, but effectively area under Israeli government control.
Thank you so much, Eyal. This presentation has actually been filmed and will be uploaded to our home page. Maybe not tomorrow, but very soon. So if you have other people who might be interested in this, spread the word. Thank you so much, Eyal. You will be up in the exhibition for a little bit as well. meandering, and I'm sure you can grab him if you have further questions. But thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the show.